When it comes to trying to live longer, there's a lot of information out there that is contraindicating. Eat more red meat, eat more eggs, stop eating plants. No, stop eating red meat. In fact, stop eating meat in general. Only eat plants. When it comes to the best way to ensure that you are going to live longer, my advice is stop worrying so much about nutrition and start exercising. Out of anything that you will start doing, exercising will have the greatest power to improve your lifespan and also how healthy you will be. And it's not just healthier physically, it's also cognitively and emotionally. And the thing is, any type of exercise will help you live longer. There are multiple studies that show that people who exercise regularly live a decade longer and also healthier than those that are sedentary. So if you're stressed about whether you should cook your food with beef tallow or olive oil or whether or not you should eat red meat, if you're not exercising, then you're honestly wasting your time, because no other thing on this planet is strong enough to help you live a decade longer and also healthier. And the thing is, you don't need to exercise that long to improve your health. Simply going from 0 minutes of exercise to 90 minutes of exercise in a whole week will reduce your risk of all-cause mortality by 14%. That means at any given point in time, you will have a 14% lower risk of dying by simply exercising for 90 minutes out of a 7-day week compared to someone who doesn't exercise at all. At the same time, if you were already regularly exercising, there's probably some things you can add or tweak to your program to help you live longer and healthier. The thing is, most doctors don't know anything about exercising, and this is where medicine is lacking. Because when's the last time that your doctor checked your strength level, your fitness level, your VO2 max, or any of those things? These are all clearly important to being healthy, and they are some of the best markers for a longer lifespan. But most doctors don't really talk about these things. It's only after we get injured or we get weak or we get some sort of disease that we need to be treated. And this is the problem right now. We call it healthcare, but it is not enough to thrive. Now, don't get me wrong, we definitely need it, but we can take it one step further. It turns out that your peak aerobic cardiorespiratory fitness, which is measured in your VO2 max, is probably the best indicator we have for how long you will live. VO2 max is a measure of the maximum rate of oxygen that you can utilize during exercise. So naturally, this is measured when someone is exercising at a higher intensity. And the more oxygen that your body can use, the higher your VO2 max number. This was a study in the American Journal of Cardiology, and they looked at 750,000 US veterans and their fitness levels. They found that someone who is a below average VO2 max compared to someone in the highest fitness group, that group with the lower VO2 max had more than a double risk of dying at any given point in time. To further emphasize this, the authors noted that being unfit was a greater risk than any other cardiac risk factor measured. Those are things like having type 2 diabetes, congestive heart failure, high blood pressure, and previous heart attacks. Now, at the same time, another very good indicator for longevity is muscle strength. Data from the CDC says that falling is the leading cause of accidental deaths in the United States in people that are 65 and older. And this is not even including people who fall, end up in the hospital, and then die later because of something else. And this is where your muscle is so important, because if you have more muscle now, you're going to have more muscle when you're older. And when you have more muscle when you're older, you're going to be able to prevent yourself from falling down. And if you do fall down, you're going to prevent yourself from getting injured. And if you need to get some sort of surgery or something, then you're going to recover a lot better. This is really important because as you get older, your muscle will start to decline. This is something called sarcopenia that unfortunately none of us can avoid. And that's also why it's really important to take action when you're younger to mitigate this muscle loss. Now, what type of exercise is best? Should you focus on endurance training or muscle strength training? Well, clearly, both are important for longevity, but there is a way to maximize your benefits for each one. So I'm going to go over some specific things that you can start doing. And I got these tips from reading the book called Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia. Now, when it comes to endurance or cardio training, you want to focus on two things: doing zone 2 training and also VO2 max training. So everyone has these different zones when they're doing cardio, and some different groups measure them differently, but Essentially, zone 1 is like a walk in the park where you're not really exercising, and zone 5 is doing an all-out exercise. So zone 2 is clearly on the easier side of that scale, but it's still more intense than a simple walk in the park. So zone 2 is typically at around 70 to 85% of your maximum heart rate. Your maximum heart rate is literally the highest your heart rate has ever been. But an easy way to gauge if you're in zone 2 is if you are doing, let's say, some rowing or jogging or bicycling, if you're able to maintain a full conversation with someone, like let's say you're on the phone and you can still talk to that person, as long as that conversation is a little strained, but you can still maintain that conversation, then you're in zone 2. If you're having a really easy time having a conversation with someone, like I'm talking in this camera right now, then you'd be in zone 1. But if you cannot maintain that full conversation, then you're entering zone 3. The hardest part, honestly, with zone 2 is that it feels easier than it should be, but you have to maintain it for a longer period of time. So according to Peter Attia, the best way to maximize your zone 2 is to get at least 3 hours a week. So that can be 3 separate 1-hour sessions, or it can be 4 separate 45-minute sessions. Now, the second thing that he talks about is VO2 Max training. And the goal here is to simply improve your VO2 Max number, because we know that having a higher level of VO2 Max will improve your longevity. So first of all, doing any type of exercise will improve your VO2 Max number. So training in that zone 2 for a longer period of time will automatically improve your VO2 Max. But if you sprinkle in some VO2 Max training on top of that, it can help you take you to the next level. So again, you can do this on a row machine, or you can do it while biking, or you can do it while running, or even swimming, but you're doing it at intensity that is slightly lower than all out. So you're gonna go for 4 minutes at this intensity, and then you're gonna recover for 4 minutes, and then you're gonna repeat this about 4 to 6 times. So basically doing a very intense jog for 4 minutes, and then relaxing for 4 minutes, and then repeating. Now, this intensity is gonna be different for everyone because it really depends on your fitness level. So you can't just copy what someone else is doing and expect to get the same result. If you're at a higher fitness than someone else, then you're probably gonna have to go more intense than that person. Now, this is a little extra tip you can start doing, is to add some breath training when you're doing cardio. Now, Dr. Attia didn't really mention this in his book, but if you read the book called Oxygen Advantage by Patrick McKeown, he talks about this a lot, and I do talk about it more in some other videos, so I'm putting a link in the description below if you want to learn more about it. But one thing you can do is to try only using your nose when you're doing this cardio, especially when you're doing that zone 2 training. Because essentially, when you're using your nose, you're gonna slow down your breathing. Now, you might think that this is bad because you're not getting as much oxygen, but in the long term, you're actually gonna improve the amount of oxygen delivery inside your body, and in turn, improve your VO2 max. Because as you slow the amount of breathing that you're doing, your body has to get more efficient, and your body has to get more efficient at delivering oxygen to all of your cells and organs. And this is the same reason why people, when they go to a higher altitude to go training, why they come back at such a higher advantage, because they were training at a higher altitude where there's less oxygen supply. So if they're getting used to that less oxygen supply, obviously their body is adapting to utilize the oxygen that they have. Now, again, I go into detail on this whole process in another video, and I'm putting that in the description below if you want to learn about it. But something else you can do is high altitude training. So instead of going to a mountain to do that high altitude training, you can literally do it at home by doing some sort of breath holding during your exercise. So one way to do this would be during your warm-up. If you're about to go on a big run or a big jog and you just want to walk to warm up for about like 5 to 10 minutes, you can do some breath holding during this warm-up. So essentially all it is after an exhale, you hold your breath while you're doing your warm-up, like walking or something like that, until you have a medium to strong urge to breathe, and then you recover by breathing through your nose. And then after a minute or so, you can repeat this. And you do this a total of 10 times during your warm-up. Now the thing is, if you keep doing this, you'll actually improve the amount of time you can hold your breath. So let's say at first you can only hold your breath like 10 steps until you have that medium to strong urge to breathe, then you have to recover. After a couple weeks, you might notice that you can get to 15 steps. That is a sign that your VO2 max is improving. Now you can even take this a step further and do it during your actual exercise. Now when you're actually running, then again, you hold your breath after an exhale and see how long it takes you to get a medium to strong urge to breathe and then recover. Now the trick here is to not do it too long. You don't want to wait until you're basically dying or gasping to take the next breath, because then you've held it too long and you're not going to get the benefits. Now, you also want to be really careful with this. Definitely don't do it in any situation where you could harm yourself. So don't do it when you're driving, don't do it when you're near water. And also, if you start to feel lightheaded or something like that, you probably want to abandon the whole exercise and then just recover. Now, when it comes to your strength training, what do you want to focus on? Well, there are 4 main things to focus on in strength training. Those are your grip strength, your eccentric and concentric movements, pulling motions, and also focusing on your lower body. These 4 specific things are all essential to living longer. And it's really easy to incorporate a lot of these things into your workout, and you probably already are incorporating most of these things. So when it comes to grip strength, there's a lot of different ways to improve it. It's literally the definition of how hard you can squeeze something. So dead hangs are an easy one where you're just hanging on a pull-up bar. You can also practice farmer's walks where you're just holding dumbbells and walking back and forth in the gym. You can also try not using those straps when you're doing heavy deadlifting or something like that. Now, obviously, sometimes if you're going for a PR, then you have to use straps because your forearms will give out. But there's lots of literature out there that says that when you have higher grip strength, then you have a lower risk of dying. The thing is right now that Americans have weaker grip strength than a whole generation ago. In 1985, men aged between 20 and 24 had a grip strength of about 121 pounds. In 2015, it was remeasured, and the men in the same age group only had a grip strength of about 101 pounds. Now, at first I thought this was weird because there's so many new gym memberships and other things that are arising, but people could just be getting lazier, I don't know. Now, moving on to eccentric and concentric movements, most people know what a concentric movement is. That's literally when you're pushing that barbell up, or when you're contracting that muscles. So when you're doing a bicep curl, as you're curling that bicep up, that is the concentric movement. The eccentric movement is the exact opposite, as you're putting that weight down, or as you're bringing that dumbbell down. This is the strength that we need to help give us control. And these are things that are going to help control us when we're walking down the stairs, or prevent us from falling down as we get older. Now, these again are really easy to incorporate. I'm not going to give you a full workout program or anything like that because there's already a ton that are out there and they're going to do a much better job than I do. But for example, when you're rowing, focus on doing a 5-second countdown as you're putting the weight down. Or if you're doing deadlifts, again, taking that time to come down rather than just putting the weight down right away. Now, the third thing I talked about was pulling motions. Pulling motions are one of the most practical movements you can do that translate into real life as you get older. If you think about it, most of the movements that we do involve pulling, like opening a door, or carrying groceries, or picking up things off the floor. And most people will have pulling days when it comes to their strength training. And most of this comes on back days, so things like pull-ups and rowing. So I like to do pulling movements about 2 times a week. Now, the final thing I wanted to talk about is your lower body. This is where it's important to target your biggest muscle groups. So targeting things like your glutes and your hamstrings are going to be important to prevent spine injuries as you get older. Now, when doing these movements, you want to focus on bending at your hips and keeping your spine straight. Again, this is going to help protect your spine. Now, again, you're probably already incorporating these into your workouts already, like squats, deadlifts, leg press, step-ups, etc. Now, when it comes down to these specific exercises and doing zone 2 and VO2 max training, I don't want you to stress out over how much zone 2 am I getting, or how much VO2 max am I getting, or am I doing everything exactly right? The bottom line is, if you are not exercising right now, then literally doing anything will help you live longer. And if you already are exercising, that is great. But if you really wanted to take it one step further, you have to start incorporating all these other things to get the maximum amount of benefits. There was an article that was recently published in Vox titled, "You Were Probably Eating Way Too Much Protein." And they go on to say that Americans are oddly obsessed with protein, consuming around twice the daily amount recommended in the federal dietary guidelines. They also say that 60% of Americans